season finale of Chris's Classic Cinema. I'm Chris Wyert.
And I'm Jacob Nemuth.
So, it's our final episode for season 1. Don't worry, we'll be getting into season 2 later this year. So, we're going to be doing something different. Well, since it's around springtime, we decided to do movies based around a guy that basically was a huge influence for, like, the puppeteering community.
And a lot of kids' childhoods, too.
I am talking about the one and only Jim Henson. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have some of the most iconic puppets in history. I'm talking about the Muppets, Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock. I could go on. Now, he also did some movies as well. He produced some, he directed some. And when it comes to these movies, now when it comes to Jim Henson in general, in my opinion, he did something to puppets that no other puppeteer has ever done.
No.
When it came to characters, some of the most iconic characters you think of, like Kermit the Frog, or Miss Piggy, or Fozzie the Bear, or so on. He and his crew was able to give them almost living, breathing souls that you could almost believe that they were real. Mm-hmm. You almost want to believe that they are real creatures. Unlike other puppeteers that just do this, he went above and beyond to make them almost seem real.
Oh yeah, PBS did an excerpt quite a while ago, back in the early 2000s, where they did a behind the scenes of how intricate these puppeteers were, and you could see the literal scaffolding built inside of them, and the mechanical parts. It's kind of freaky. If you don't want your childhood getting ruined, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you want to know more about puppeteering itself, I'd recommend that. And
not just that, but animatronics as well.
Oh, yeah.
He was able to make robotics seem so real. Mm-hmm. An example I can think of was the popular 1990s TV series Dinosaurs. Mm. They were all done by his Creature Shop, and even 30 years later, they still look incredible.
Oh yeah, and the Creature Shop today, the Jim Henson Creature Shop, is still going really well and strong. In fact, their most recent big project was the Five Nights at Freddy's movie that they just did. They did all the animatronics for that. And if you want to know more about the behind the scenes of how the Creature Shop is still going and kind of all the cool things about that shop, Adam Savage, Mythbusters, actually has his own personal YouTube channel called Adam Savage Tested, and he actually did a tour of not only the Creature Shop, but also got to talk to some of the puppeteers.
And some of the puppeteers a lot of them are gone, but some of them are still around. I mean, sadly, Jim Henson died back in 1990. That was a huge loss for the company, let alone for a lot of kids at that time.
And the entire film industry. Yeah, the whole industry felt it.
Yeah, and nowadays, like, there's only a few remaining, like Frank Oz. Mm-hmm. But then there's others that have died too, like Carol Spinney, who did Big Bird and Oscar and Sesame Street. Mm-hmm. He was one of the last remaining original cast members of that show.
Right.
With that in mind, let's go to the movies. We're going to start off with 1979 with the big screen premiere of The Muppets. Before they had The Muppet Show, but now, The Muppet Movie. Kermit the Frog decides to leave his swampy home to search for a career in Hollywood. Along the way, he meets some new friends. He falls in love. He gets caught up with this guy who just wants him more than anything to be the spokesperson for his Frog's Legs restaurant.
He does have nice legs.
There's singing and dancing. There's cameos all over the place. This movie was a big hit when it first came out.
I mean, it's our childhood, isn't it? Like, I name a single person born between 1970 and the year 2000. That's a 30-year span that didn't have a VHS copy of this movie at their home.
I honestly didn't.
Oh, you didn't? You were one of those freaks that used the newfangled DVDs?
I'll be honest, I didn't really get into the Muppets when I was a kid. I mean, I remember having the videotape of Muppet Treasure Island, but somehow I just didn't really get into them until I was older.
That's one of the worst ones in my opinion. But I digress. You know, like that. It's one of the most. It's in my opinion, it's one of the best Muppet movies. Period. You know, because it really encapsulates all the characters so incredibly well, and their own element too.
Yeah, I mean, right at the beginning, you can see them getting ready to watch the movie about their origins. You can see Kermit, the two old guys, Statler and Waldorf.
And rolling in this big boat of like a Cadillac or a Lincoln of some sort. They're being driven in on this big limousine, you know, jet black limousine.
Yeah, and even...
Right into Universal.
Yeah, and Kermit's telling his nephew Robin if it's how it all actually happened, how the Muppets got to...
Animals going ham on a theater seat, as he does.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course Fozzie's trying to do jokes, waka waka.
Yes.
Now this movie is just, it is just so good.
It's a very good movie. It holds up.
It's like one of the family movies you have got to see at least once.
Yeah, it nearly revived a dead car brand too.
The what?
A dead car brand.
Oh.
Studebaker.
Oh, yes! The Studebaker.
I don't think anybody under the age of 40 would know what a Studebaker is had it not been for this movie. Honestly.
The only other time
the car brand died in the 60s. So we're talking like so back in 79, a Studebaker would have been seen as a run-down hunk of metal that you couldn't get parts for.
The only time I've ever seen the only other time I think I've seen a Studebaker was on a TV episode of Knight Rider. That's basically it.
There we go. That about sums it up right there.
And then when it comes to like the characters, I mean, Kermit the Frog, he's dreaming big. He has his soul in his banjo.
He has got a lot of talent with his voice and the dancing.
But then there's the puppeteering. Jim Henson went above and beyond to make these creatures seem so real.
Mm-hmm.
That first sequence with him in the swamp.
Yes.
He's literally puppeteering underwater in like a tin can with nothing but his arm up.
Yeah. Playing banjo too, mind you. I mean, the banjo was, of course, dubbed in later, but...
Yeah. And next thing you know, they're using these really long puppet strings going down to make us believe that Kermit is actually riding a bike.
Oh, yeah. I mean, granted, you can see the strings nowadays if you got a clear enough television set. But back in the day,
it was mind-blowing.
It was mind-blowing what they were pulling off back then. Again, just the contraptions that had to be purpose-built for one scene sometimes.
I mean, just that scene alone in the swamp. I mean, you can tell that Jim Henson wanted to give Kermit the big screen debut he wanted.
That he deserved.
Exactly. I mean, if I recall, now he has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Oh, yes, he does. Yes, he does.
Yeah. And when it comes to the cameos, too, I mean, you had some very big names from, not just back then, but even to this day.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you had big stars like Bob Hope, Steve Martin, Mel Brooks played a mad scientist.
Yeah.
Orson Welles played a Hollywood CEO.
Yeah.
And even Cloris Leachman.
Mm-hmm.
That's right, Frau Blocher was in this.
It was an insane movie. With a name like Jim Henson, back in '79, you know, Jim Henson was already a pretty big household name in Hollywood.
I mean, heck, the first big cameo we see is Dom DeLuise telling Kermit to go to Hollywood.
Exactly. You know, and playing a talent scout in a swamp boat, of all things.
Yeah.
Running for his life, paddling for his life away from alligators.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Dom DeLuise, I basically grew up with him in all those Don Bluth movies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
God rest him.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I mean, when it comes to just and then you have Charles Durning as the guy who owns the Frog Legs restaurant. He wants Kermit more than anybody to be his spokesfrog.
Because of the legs.
Yes.
His dancing ability.
He is willing to chase him across the entire country until he gets what he wants. He does not take no for an answer.
He ended up didn't get what he wants, thankfully. But
at least his I think it was his agent or sidekick helped the Muppets out.
Yeah, the sidekick helped the Muppets out, and I remember him dancing for joy at the demise of the character. You know, like literally jumping up and down for joy at the end, towards the end of the movie.
And then you have the songs, because when it comes to the songs, I mean, I found out that the soundtrack even earned the movie a Grammy.
Oh yeah, understandably so.
Yeah, it was, if I recall, it was for like Best Children's Album.
I mean, the Rainbow Connection song being the most famous song, one of the most famous children's songs of the late 20th century.
You can't think about Kermit the Frog without instantly thinking of that song.
Without the Rainbow Connection and It's Not Easy Being Green.
And I mean,
two songs.
It's just like Judy Garland with Over the Rainbow and the Wizard of Oz. You can't think about the song without instantly thinking about her.
Exactly.
And when it came to the Rainbow Connection, it was basically like a new version of Over the Rainbow, but my God. Even over almost 50 years later, it is still so heartfelt.
It is. And driving, and I think that's an overall theme of the movie is the Rainbow Connection. Because that's the opening song, and it's also the closing song. And you could see elements of the rainbow being sprinkled throughout the movie. Like, for example, when they are driving the older car after they get rid of the Studebaker, they have that other station wagon that was done up in rainbow graffiti. And then they were driving the bus that was also graffitied for a good chunk of the movie.
Oh yeah, from the Mayhem.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you have the closing sequence, which I won't talk about. But I challenge anybody to see how many characters you can recognize at the closing sequence.
And not just Muppets too, Sesame Street characters as well. I mean, even Big Bird had a scene in it alone with Frozzie and Kermit.
Oh yeah. You know, so it was they pulled all the stops on this one.
They literally had dozens of characters.
Hundreds.
Yeah.
Hundreds of characters if you look at the ending sequence.
Yeah, I mean. And then when you have like some things like with Miss Piggy, I mean, the way she's going nuts after Mel Brooks tries to brainwash Kermit.
Oh yeah.
That scene alone is one of the funniest in the movie.
It is. Any scene where Miss Piggy goes ham.
She's
is funny.
If she was here, she would karate chop you like that.
Yeah, I couldn't help it. That was unintentional.
Yeah, and like I said, the other characters, they're really great. I mean, you have Fozzie, you have the band, you have Rolf the dog.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm. And then Gonzo. Who could forget Gonzo?
Oh yes, and of course his chicken Camilla.
Of course.
When it came to the Muppet movie, it was a huge hit at the box office. Critics loved it. And when it comes to the production alone, it was big. I actually found out, if I recall, I think they shot some of the movie in England.
Uh-huh. Yep.
But still, it really gives that American feel.
In London, actually.
And somehow it still looks American.
Mm-hmm.
I remember watching on YouTube these old home movies that Jim Henson made during the filming.
Which he made many.
And the ad-libs that they did are awesome.
Oh, yeah.
I highly recommend watching the home movies.
They're absolutely hilarious. And if you own like a Blu-ray or a DVD version of the movie, you'll also get some of the home movies included as a bonus feature, if I recall correctly.
You can just tell how much fun they have bringing these characters to life.
Oh, yeah.
And you can just tell what the friendship they have.
Yeah, and you can tell how, even when they were making the movie, how well documented everything was. To like a OCD level of documentation, to the point where everybody that had even a little bit of part of it knew exactly what was happening, every single tier of the movie, every single step.
Yeah, and when it comes to the music by Paul Williams,
mm-hmm.
he ended up earning 2 Oscar nominations: Best Musical Score and Original Song for the Rainbow Connection. Apparently, it lost both Oscars. And a lot of people to this day still think the Rainbow Connection should have won.
I agree.
It lost to that song. It goes like it goes from the Sally Field movie Normal Ray.
Highway robbery, if you ask me. Highway robbery.
Especially since the song has now been preserved in the National Recording Registry of the Library of Congress.
See?
And it was named by the American Film Institute as one of the top 100 greatest movies of all time. It's like within the top 75.
Oh, yeah.
And the movie itself was preserved in the National Film Registry back in like 2009, if I recall.
Mm-hmm.
That shows how iconic this movie is and how groundbreaking it was for the Muppet franchise in general.
and not just the Muppet franchise, but Jim Henson as an individual, and also the studio. I know that Universal also had a big part in it as well. You know, Universal being gracious enough to actually distribute the film.
Yeah, but now, and of course nowadays it's owned by Disney, so
It is owned by Disney.
you can find it on Disney Plus.
Yeah, it's not hard to find this movie anywhere. I rented it on YouTube for a couple of bucks. It's not that expensive if you rent
Yeah.
it.
All in all, ratings.
I mean, if this isn't a 5, I'll eat my shoe. I mean, how can you not give it a 5 out of 5?
I can agree. This is definitely a must-watch.
Oh yeah.
Because this movie, it has so much heart, it has so much comedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's practically one of the best family movies you can think of
Yeah.
that aren't animated.
That aren't animated. We'll touch on that briefly, but yeah.
Yeah, so that was the Muppet movie. Now we're going to head to 1982 with a completely drastic change. During the 80s, Jim Henson wanted to do, along with the Muppets, some movies that were really different from what you'd think. I'm talking about dark fantasy movies. Because when it came, and the 80s was a big decade for those kind of movies for kids.
Oh yeah.
I mean, think about it. There was movies like Dragon Slayer, The Return to Oz. That was very dark.
We did an episode about dark fantasy movies already with The Hobbit.
Oh yes.
You know.
And also there was let me see, even Disney did some, like, I recall them doing a movie of Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes.
I would argue that Fantasia is also kind of in that similar sphere as well.
That was made in 1940.
Really? Oh wow, that holds up really well.
Disney
then.
Fantasia.
Man, that holds up way better than I thought it would, because I thought that was way newer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, anyway, so Jim Henson and Frank Oz decided to direct a very unique story called The Dark Crystal. In a faraway world, a group of friends find themselves on a quest to return a shard to a crystal that is being controlled by an evil group of creatures that want to take over the world.
I wouldn't say that it's a group of friends. It's two Gelflings.
Yeah, basically, almost. They're like hobbits.
They're two Gelflings, and they're the last of their kind because and they were both rescued from their village from different circumstances. One by a group of wise men, and the other by a group of podlings, I believe.
Yeah, who are and some of them are slaves to the
enslaved to the dark beings.
The Skeksis.
The Skeksis, yes.
Now this movie is just, when I saw this, I'm like, wow.
Wow. That's what I thought too.
The puppetry in this is beyond.
It's insanity. There's no other word for it. It's insane.
Not a single human character is in this movie.
Even
it's all puppets.
Not a human, not a real plant either, by the way. Even the plants were puppets.
Yeah, but I mean,
but in the detail, the amount of detail, like the Gelflings. So like what were the evil ones? The
Skeksis.
The Skeksis. In the opening sequence, when they were talking about how the crystal cracked, and they were looking, and they panned to the Skeksis, that you could see them breathing patterns in their necks and face. That kind of detail in 1982 can only be rivaled by modern CGI. And even then, I don't think most modern CGI would
back then, there was the visual effects company International Light and Magic, ILM.
Yeah.
From George Lucas.
Oh yeah.
But this was Jim Henson's Creature Shop, and they went above and beyond to make us believe that these guys were real.
With just even the intricacy of them breathing, I'm like, when I saw them breathing, I'm like, they nailed what?
How did they do that?
How did they do that? How did they? Because you would think the only thing I could think of is a servo, but that's today's technology, not 1980s. Servos didn't exist in the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to this movie, I mean, the amount of detail they did is out of this world.
Literally out of this world. Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to the characters too, I mean, they're very relatable. I mean, you have the Gelflings. They're like little elves mixed with hobbits.
Yes.
They're on this quest. They they know what they have to do, but yet they also form friendships along the way.
Yes, and they both have extremely difficult, different skill set. The male Gelfling, the one that is focused on, he has a lot more knowledge in the academic knowledge. So knows how to read and write, has a lot of background knowledge on history.
Whereas the girl is basically a friend to all nature.
All nature, and
she knows how to communicate with everything and everyone.
Way more athletic too, and is able to hunt, is able to fly.
You have the wise mages who are just so incredible looking.
Oh yeah.
The way that they walk so slowly.
Because it kind of drives home the point of how old and frail they are.
I found out that some of those puppets actually had to take like 4 puppeteers at one time.
Does not surprise me.
That's about as much as it took to make Jabba the Hutt in Return of the Jedi.
Yep. For one movie.
And then you have the Skeksis. Each one has its own unique design, yet they are all just so slimy and
conniving, and they all have their own personality as well.
I mean, you have the Chamberlain, who at first he is stripped of his title after losing a challenge, but he wants everything he can to get it back.
Not only that, but also at one point goes for the crown of the Empire.
Right when the Emperor's on his deathbed.
Basically, yes.
And then you have the guy who takes his place, and he is just power hungry. He wants any threat to his power wiped out.
Not only, well, yeah, you could tell how brutal he is as well, but you could also tell how clumsy they are. They're a little slow sometimes, because obviously they have a lot of power and wield a lot of influence over the land, but it's also, you can even tell that but here's the twist of it all, right? They're dying out too.
Yes, as well as the mages.
Mm-hmm. And they're actually spiritually, so if one dies, the other one dies.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really interesting concept. And then it's revealed why that is at the end.
But we won't give any spoilers. When it comes to the Skeksis dying, you literally see the Emperor crumble like dust.
Crumbling to dust. I told my friends when I was watching this that I'm going to tell my kids in the future that that's what will happen to them if they don't eat their vegetables. And I think it would work. I think I would get my kids addicted to broccoli with that logic.
But then the whole quest. I mean, it's just amazing going from one place to another, seeing new characters at the time. I mean, you have this crazy old lady who basically
has an observatory, like an actual full proper. The only other time I've seen anything like even closely resembling that was in a much later film, The Tomb Raider. That's 15 years later, by the way. Like 15, 20 years later, The Tomb Raider, where they had a similar, like, intricate, this massive observatory,
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't think that sort of prop was possible in 1981, 1982.
Well, when it comes to 1982 too, I mean, the sets, the costumes, the cinematography, they're almost A-class.
They are A-class. Like, a lot of the stuff and stunts they did hold up today. Like, even the special effects where they had the lightning scattering across the landscape with the castle in the center. It's like, that's incredible.
Personally, I'm disappointed it didn't even I'm completely disappointed this didn't even get one Oscar nomination.
Criminal. Like, I do understand why. Like, I think that
it was
the Gelfling characters themselves, like the male Gelfling was a little bit of a weak character in terms of its dialogue. His dialogue was a little bit weak.
Yeah, and then there are times when you can tell that it was actually not a puppet. It was just a guy in a costume during the walking and running sequences from far away.
Yes, they did have to cheat a little bit, but I wouldn't have blamed them if they cheated. I'd be surprised if they didn't cheat more, actually.
Yeah, but still, I mean, the cinematography is beautiful.
Absolutely amazing. I was wowed by the, like I mentioned before, that the landscapes, even the landscapes were puppets. Like the plants were puppets that were well timed and coordinated. And even the introduction, like the intro to the movie with the narration, that gave me goosebumps. Like, that whole thing gave me goosebumps.
Yeah, and just the music too. I mean, it has that grand scale thing like Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And to think that we reviewed another movie that was from this exact time frame with a special guest, and we reviewed Lord of the Rings. That came out around the same time, right? That was also around 1978, 89, 79, 1980, right around there. Doesn't even come close to this. Doesn't even come close.
Amen to that.
Like, it's a night and day difference, and you can see you can see that you can definitely this along with all with the Muppets are the reasons why puppeteering for fantasy films and children films were king for so long, and why a lot of people a lot of bigger studios were so hesitant to incorporate animation.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it would all. I mean, it's a shame that this was around the time when CGI was just starting.
Oh, we'll talk about that in a couple movies from now.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to this movie, it was a box office success. It didn't get quite the reception at first, but nowadays it's considered a classic.
It is. In fact, even with the Dark Crystal, that's associated with a lot of EDM stuff. A lot of the elements have been incorporated into modern media. The Crystal Method, some of the songs that the Crystal Method did, which is a big EDM group in the early 2000s, incorporated some of the dialogue from the Crystal Castle.
And I know that a few years ago, Netflix actually did a prequel TV series, Age of Resistance.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it only was canceled only after one season.
In classic Netflix fashion.
And even with that, it even won the Emmy for like outstanding children's program, if I recall.
Yeah, I believe there is also a comic book series surrounding the franchise as well, if I'm not mistaken.
And that just shows how popular it is even 40 years later.
Yeah, it's definitely developed a massive cult following, especially in the fantasy world.
And not just that, but for puppeteering as well.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and this was all, and there wasn't any CGI at all.
None. Well, there were some VFX effects. Like I said, the lightning had to be VFX, but I think that was done by hand.
Yeah, but still, it's just CGI could not replace any of this.
No. I mean, if you want to know what the equivalent of how good CGI was at the time, Tron.
Exactly, the same year.
Same year. That's the only movie that could maybe hold the camera. Not really. Like, it's good. It's good in its own right, and maybe we'll feature that someday, but...
Yeah, well, maybe. So anyway, what would you give this movie?
I'm giving it a 4 out of 5. I would give it a 4.5 or a 5 out of 5, but I did feel that some of the dialogue was a bit on the weaker side.
I'm giving it 4 out of 5, too. I mean, it is still so good.
It's a very good movie. It's one that I would be actively hunting down on.
If you're a fan of 80s movies, you gotta see this at least once.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree. It's now one of my top 10 favorite 80s movies of all time after this. I've never even seen it. Dark Crystal, never seen it before this. I'm like, okay, I see the hype. I get it.
Yeah, well. Now, so that was The Dark Crystal. Now we're going ahead a year later, 1983, with another Muppet movie. So in between the Muppet movie and this movie, there was another one. There was like a sequel to the Muppet movie called The Great Muppet Caper. That was an okay hit at the time. But now we're going to the film that takes place after that. We're going to New York City because the Muppets take Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
Kermit and his friends are college grads who want to bring their stage show onto Broadway. Unfortunately, when they find out they're being scammed, they go their separate ways. But then, next thing you know, another producer comes along and they want to get the show back together, but there's a lot of obstacles along the way. One of them being Kermit experiencing amnesia.
Not only that, but everybody having to come back together as well because, well, quite frankly, everyone went their own ways, so they had to literally reunite the gang.
Yeah.
And that alone had its own set of challenges.
Now, this movie is definitely kind of different from the Muppet movie, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Because, on the one hand, it's... For one thing, it kind of breaks the script of what the Muppet movie was. The Muppet movie was supposed to be the origin story of how the Muppets came to be. Whereas this, it takes kind of some liberties into its own right, and
It's
makes
kind of like an
its own
alternate
canon.
timeline.
In a way, yes. In a way, yes.
Then again, there have been different alternate timelines too. I mean, think about the movies, the Muppet movies that came out back in the early 2010s.
Yes. I almost never acknowledge those.
And then you had those movies from the 90s.
Right.
But this movie is still okay in my book.
It's pretty decent.
I mean, when it comes, you can't go wrong with New York City. I mean, the Muppets in New York City.
There is a little bit of a asterisk you gotta put there. This isn't just New York City. It's red light district area in New York City. The 80s, baby. Back when the entire city was plagued with red light district.
Oh. But still.
So
it's that whole follow your dreams thing,
yeah,
just like the first one.
I just like how the Muppets were blindly going into New York City, thinking that, oh, it's going to be all this glamour. And then the scam artist was like, oh, is this a show about shootings and cop chases? So, yeah.
And next thing you know,
it's the 80s.
And next thing you know, he's getting arrested because he's actually a con man. And just like the first Muppet movie, this had a lot of big cameos too. I mean,
oh yeah.
I mean, you had Liza Minnelli, Joan Rivers. Let me see who else. James Coco.
I'm horrible with names. You're doing better than me.
Those are the only big ones I can think of for now.
Well, you forgot to mention one big name. You forgot to mention that Oz was also co-producer as well.
And he was the director too,
and
Frank Oz.
Frank Oz was also involved with this. In fact, this was an agreement that they had. Frank Oz and Jim Henson had an agreement to do 2 movies in a row in quick succession. It was this one and The Dark Crystal.
Yeah, Frank Oz would actually go on to direct other movies too during the 90s. Some of them not even with Muppets. I mean, the ones I can think of he did without them are like House Sitter with Goldie Hawn, In and Out with Kevin Kline.
Also a great burger joint.
Yeah.
In and Out.
Yeah. Oh, he also did Little Shop of Horrors in the 80s.
Ooh. Criminal that we couldn't do this one, but not a Henson production.
Yeah. But still, it's just, you can tell how close those two were working together.
They were very, very close, and I believe is he still going?
Yeah, I know Frank Oz is still alive.
Yeah, and I don't know if Frank Oz is still going in the film industry or not.
I'm honestly not sure. But still, it's just...
But I would say, out of the 2 Muppet movies we're discussing, this is definitely the weaker of the 2. To be clear, it's still a pretty good one. It's still a classic, but this one definitely has, in terms of like the setting, you could definitely tell it's New York. It's not just New York. Like you could say, oh, it's the glamorous New York City. It's like, no, it's not. It's 80s New York City. 80s New York City is not that glamorous.
And then you have
it's dirty. It's rude.
But then there's also some new characters as well.
Oh yeah.
Like there's the girl that Kermit is friends with and actually gets Miss Piggy jealous.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Wasn't that like the nephew or daughter of the guy that owned the diner?
I think so.
That Kermit worked
And then
at.
you had some new Muppets like Rizzo the Rat. He would end up working with Gonzo in 2. He'd end up being like Gonzo's best friend in 2 movies in the 90s.
Oh yeah. In fact, he even became a recurring character throughout for the franchise thus forth.
And the puppeteer that actually did Rizzo, Steve Whitmire, would actually take Jim Henson's role of Kermit after he died.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, he got fired a few years ago, so Matt Vogel took his place. But I grew up with Steve Whitmire as him, and as Kermit.
As did I.
I still think I don't want to go there. I don't want to say anything that might get us.
I will say that out of all the Kermits, Jim Henson's obviously the OG. That's obviously the best one.
Amen to that.
If we say any other answer.
I mean, the way he goes into that restaurant with like that fake Clark Gable mustache.
Yes.
And then he's putting a picture on that restaurant wall. I found out that restaurant actually still has that picture up there to this day.
No kidding.
Cut us to a car going to New York City.
Yes, we're going to New York City. We're going to find that restaurant. We're gonna be like, but we're gonna have to stop in Chicago for Adam's ribs on the way. Anybody gets that reference, you get bonus points from me.
Now, when it comes to the music in this movie, it may not be not as good as the Muppet movie, but the songs are still pretty catchy.
Oh, the songs are really, really good.
The opening number alone. I mean, Kermit whistling and.
Oh wait, which opening number? Because they played the.
Together Again.
I'm talking about like
the very opening.
Oh, the very, very big opening. Okay.
And then you have the big Broadway song at the end.
Oh yeah, with the
elaborate costumes
and the wedding as well.
With characters from Sesame Street and Fraggle Rock.
It was insane, you know, and you could definitely tell, like even the priest as well had this beautiful opera voice, this classical opera voice.
Yeah, and the costumes too for the Muppets. I mean,
insane.
The way they do the glitter in the finale.
And you have to understand, like, the costumes had to be purpose-built for just a couple of scenes sometimes. But for the Muppets specifically.
But still, they're so detailed.
The crazy thing is, sometimes the costumes were so intricate, they had to make whole new Muppets.
Yeah.
So that you had to have multiple Kermits, you had to have multiple Miss Piggies.
But there's one sequence alone that caused the creation of an entire franchise. I'm talking about the sequence with the Muppet Babies.
Oh, yes.
I
forgot about that.
Miss Piggy ends up singing a song about how she'll always love Kermit, and you see them as babies. It ended up becoming one of the most popular Muppet Babies ended up being one of the most popular TV shows of the 1980s. It ended up winning 4 Emmys in a row for Outstanding Animated Program.
That was a bit of a trend in the 80s, though. Characters getting baby-tized, because that wasn't the only franchise experiencing that.
Yeah, but this was the one that worked, and it lasted over 100 episodes.
I mean, we're not going to talk about a pup named Scooby-Doo?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Where the exact same
or
thing
Tom and Jerry kids, or the Flintstone kids.
Or how about the Looney Tune babies?
That was the 2000s.
It was the 2000s, but it's in a similar vein, and it still doesn't.
I know that when it came to Muppet Babies, they even had a reboot on Disney Junior just a few years ago that lasted a couple episodes.
Oh, wow. Who'd have thunk?
Yeah, and that earned a few Emmys as well. But still, the original Muppet Babies, it's still one of the most iconic cartoons of the 80s. And frankly, I wish it was for all the copyright stuff that they had to do with, like, all the clips they used in those shows. I'm pretty sure it'd be a hit on DVD.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Overall, what would you give the rating?
Well, let's talk about this movie first.
Oh, okay, go on.
Well, when it came to the Muppets Take Manhattan, it was a hit at the box office, and critics did like it. It even earned a nomination at the Oscars for Best Musical Score. You'll never guess who the Muppets lost to.
83. What Disney movie was going on in 83?
It wasn't Disney. It was Prince for Purple Rain.
Yeah, you know what? That's a fair thing to lose to. I can't argue that. I cannot argue with that, okay? All right, you get that point. Your point has been earned.
God rest Prince. But still, and if I recall, just recently, they just released like a 4K Blu-ray release of the Muppets Take Manhattan.
Oh yeah, like, again, this is an era where film could go way higher than 1080p. You know, like when they were filming stuff back in the day, just because VistaVision, this was using VistaVision, I believe. The cameras didn't have a resolution per se. It was more like how good the film itself was. You can go really insane resolutions even back then.
And I mean, just those shots of New York City, they are so good.
They're really good shots of New York City. Although back in the 80s and 90s, that was the prime of, helicopters and taking beautiful shots of New York City. Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if some of it was stock footage.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have drones back then.
No, but this was also in the era where you have the iconic city skyline that a lot of us still associate with New York City.
With some of them being gone, unfortunately.
Well, we're not going there.
I know. All in all, what would you give this movie?
I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5.
I'm giving it that too.
It's not my favorite Muppets movie. It's okay. It's pretty good, but it's definitely showed signs of age. mainly because it's 80s New York, and 80s New York is almost near unrecognizable
And
today.
the fashion, and when it comes to like the fashion back then too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like, there are still some elements of the movie that hold up, but it just...
Yeah, there are some elements that are timeless.
Yeah, but not as timeless as the original Muppet movie.
Yeah, but still, when it comes to this movie, if you're a Muppets fan, I say go for it.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a must.
Yeah. So that was the Muppets Take Manhattan. Now for our last film, we're going to 1986 with another dark fantasy movie that Jim Henson worked on. But this time, it features David Bowie. I'm talking about his crazy adventure movie, Labyrinth.
Labyrinth.
A teenage girl wishes for a goblin to take her half-brother away. When her wish actually comes true, she decides she wants him back and goes on an adventure to find him, meeting some friends along the way, while also facing with the Goblin King, who wants to keep the baby as his own.
Yes, the Goblin King, of course, being played by David Bowie.
Yeah. Now, this has got to be one of the most 80s movies I've ever seen.
Oh my god. It's almost a detriment now, isn't it? Like, I'm sure back then it was like the movie, but there were some parts of the movie that were just too painfully 80s, okay?
I mean, this movie...
this was too painful.
I mean, even when it comes to like movies from back then, like E.T. or The Goonies, there's still some things that are still good to this day.
Oh, yes, but this takes it to a whole nother, oh my...
I mean, just David Bowie's music alone.
Just his hair alone. you can't... forget the music. Music was terribly 80s, but still pretty good. But the hair...
I mean, it might as well be a mullet.
What do you mean, might as well be?
But still, when it comes to this movie, it was a really interesting take.
Interesting is, I guess, the best way to put it, yeah.
I mean, you have the main character, Jennifer Connelly, as the teenage girl.
As Sarah.
She plays a spoiled brat, but she matures as she goes on her adventure. She's willing to do anything to get her half-brother back, even though she made the wish. She realizes she was wrong.
I didn't care for the character too much. She only spoke in playwright.
Oh yeah, that's right.
She only spoke in Shakespearean playwright, and that wore thin on me very quickly. And I kid you not, is it appropriate to have a drinking game where she goes, where you take a shot every time she goes, it's not fair? I mean, is that appropriate to say on television? We're gonna find out. But I felt brat is the way I would put it. Yeah, she was a brat. She was a spoiled, rotten brat that...
It's like an opposite Alice in Wonderland.
She was a spoiled, rotten brat that took... And I liked how the character that we're supposed to be rooting against called her out and said, you always take everything for granted, don't you? I've done everything for you, and you just keep taking things for granted.
Yes.
It's like, you know what, we're supposed to hate this character, but I'm actually siding with him.
I mean, David Bowie, you can just tell he is enjoying every single second of his performance.
Oh, see, this was in his heyday when David Bowie was going pretty hard on a lot of stuff, though.
Yeah, I mean, the 80s was when he was at his peak.
It really was, and well, let's talk about the movie, from an 80s perspective. Like, for its time, it was still very good. The puppeteering was fantastic.
I mean, you have that one character, Huggle, that's pure that's an animatronic suit, but it still looks so good.
Yeah, but there were points where
it was nothing but puppets.
It was puppet. There was actually two versions of Huggle. There was the puppet version and the animatronic version. They actually made two different versions of Huggle depending on what the scene they needed to film. I did remember reading that.
Cool.
And then, of course, you had the big, what was his name? The big guy.
I don't remember, but he had, like, those big tusks.
One moment, please. We're going to pause so that I can look it up. But I know he was voiced by the same guys who voiced Animal. I'm only looking it up so that because we're going to be bringing him up a little bit here and there. Ludo.
Okay. And then you have the big guy, Ludo. I mean, he is just...
Really lovable character.
You almost want to give him a hug.
Oh, like you wouldn't? And I like how he was voiced by... And the voice will sound very familiar as well. Because, of course, Ludo, I think, was voiced by the same person who did Animal for the Muppets. So you can definitely tell that this is a very much... this was definitely a Jim Henson production. You could tell it was a Henson production because of...
Even Jim Henson directed it.
Because you can recognize a lot of the voices. You can recognize a lot of the characters.
Yeah, but when it comes to the... And then you have the songs from David Bowie.
Oh.
If I had to pick any movie that... If I had to pick any movie with songs that just scream 80s, this is it. I mean, they're almost music video quality.
They really were. If this movie was just done as a musical, like it was as a musical, but if this was just aired straight on MTV, I don't think anybody would have batted an eye. And you just sprinkle out, just sprinkle the musical sequences on MTV. I don't think anybody would bat an eye.
I mean, you have him singing about one song about him just wanting to have how much fun he's gonna have with having the baby. Next thing you know, he's doing this song where the girl ends up in like this dream sequence where she finds herself at this very elegant ball and
never eat a peach from a stranger. Never eat a peach from a stranger. That's why.
Yeah, I mean, this movie is trippy for an 80s movie.
Oh my god.
It's almost psychedelic.
It really is. It is insanely psychedelic.
And this was the 80s, not the 60s.
But again, I think that almost hurts it in a way.
Yeah.
Because it does. Sarah is insufferable. She really is. She's an insufferable character that I just cannot get with.
I mean, you get her journey. She wants to save her half brother because she did a wish she didn't mean.
She did and she didn't, right? You could tell she was definitely extremely irritated. But screaming at a baby? Come on, you don't scream at a baby.
I mean, it's your brother for Pete's sake.
Yeah, well, even so, you just don't scream at a baby, even if it isn't your brother.
Yeah.
And it's like, she was insufferable. And
it's like I said, it's like an opposite Alice in Wonderland.
And of course the songs are so 80s. It's also painful.
Even just the visual effects as well.
Okay, now let's talk about that. The opening sequence. The opening sequence was absolutely amazing because they did have some CGI in it. I could tell it had some CGI in it, and that it was incredible. That opening holds up today, even.
Yeah.
It was an amazing opening. And even at the very first few scenes where she's reciting the playwright, she's reciting the Labyrinth playwright, and she's doing her playwright speak. I thought, just based on the cinematography, that it's literally a movie that takes place. It's just a really, really delightfully 80s movie that's set in a fantasy world, But no, it's just a park that's in a town.
Yeah, next you know, I mean, just the whole idea of her going to another world, like I said, it's basically like another version of Alice in Wonderland or The Wizard of Oz, with her meeting friends along the way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
It's like an 80s Alice in Wonderland.
Yep, in all the worst ways, too.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because again, I think that...
But still, but David Bowie, he owned his role.
Oh, he owned it. He absolutely owned the role.
I mean, even when he's singing, and then, I mean, that scene alone with him doing those scenes with
With the goblins and everything.
Yeah. And then the whole staircase sequence with the MC Escher stairs. He's just everywhere, and he's like, I can, if you want, you just have to, I don't know how to say it.
Don't need to. I don't think so. But here's the thing. Now, there is one thing that we got to keep in mind. David Bowie is a bit of a polarizing singer. Even though he was an absolute rock star at his peak in the 80s, it wasn't everybody's cup of tea, So, with that in mind, this movie isn't going to be for everybody. In fact, I think out of all the movies, this one is probably the worst of the batch. It's still an iconically 80s movie, and if you grew up in the 80s, you've probably already seen this movie.
Yeah.
You know,
Especially when it comes to, like, I mean, this was back when PG actually meant parental guidance needed compared to nowadays.
oh yes, yes. Like this was this was a true PG movie, I'd say.
Yeah, nowadays the only PG you see are for animated movies that might as well be rated G.
Now I'm gonna ask you something. Did you spray a can of Febreze just so that you wouldn't have to think about the infinite pit of stench? 'Cause I know I did. As soon as that scene came out and I saw that and the farting noises, I'm like, all right, gonna get the Febreze. Because, you know, my brain was like, this is supposed to smell smelly. And boy, did it make it look smelly. I'm going to get the Febreze and just try and cleanse my brain of pineapple. Okay, break out the citrus. You know, like, no, but, and then of course the summoning of the rocks was also pretty funny.
Yeah, and then when it comes to just the other, I mean...
And then there was the Pipsqueak dog too, that was like,
yeah.
that was all chivalry.
Yeah, the fox.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to this movie in general, it's just, I mean, I don't know, if I recall, I think it was a success at the box office.
Barely.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it took a few weeks to break even. Like it was one of those movies that when it came to the box office, it was more of a slow burn than anything.
Yeah.
Like initially, like for the opening weekend, it only made half the money back of what the budget was. You know, and so so it wasn't like a smash hit by any stretch of the imagination. It was almost a failure.
But like
it was more of a wash, if anything.
But like the Dark Crystal, now it's basically it's a cult film.
It's a cult film for those who obsessed with the 80s.
And Jim Henson.
And Jim Henson.
Unfortunately, this would be one of the last films that Jim Henson directed before he died in 1990.
Yeah, he did one more film after this, and we discussed even reviewing that one, but we felt that one was a bit too dark, so we decided to just go with Labyrinth and Castle.
He didn't actually direct it. He just helped out with it. The Witches.
Yes.
One of the last movies he worked on were actually the first two Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies.
The live actions.
Yeah, with the full creature shop suits and puppets. But yeah, losing Jim Henson was a big blow to the entertainment community.
It really was. So, overall, what are you gonna rank this movie? I've had a number in my mind since yesterday.
You go first then.
I'm giving it a 2. It's too 80s. Like, I like the 80s. I love synthesizers. The 80s are a fantastic decade of pop culture. But between it being the hair and the music being, the music was a bit much. The hair was way too much, and Sarah was too pretentious for my liking. I'm giving it a 2.
I'm giving it a 3 out of 5.
You know, like this was one movie that I'm like, this movie's too 80s. That's a thing. Even
I didn't
think it was possible to have a movie that was too 80s.
I mean, think about it. There are other movies from that decade too that are almost timeless. I mean, E.T., The Goonies.
The Crystal Castle, the Dark Crystal. That was another one. I mean, the Dark Crystal, I would say, is timeless as well, and that came out in 81.
82.
82, yeah. Like those. So there are definitely movies from the 80s that hold up really well and are super relatable and are really good. War games, like we can go on.
Or
and
the
on.
Star Wars movies.
Back to the Future, like we can go on and on and on. Labyrinth isn't on that list. It is just simply not cutting the cheese. It's there we go, cheese. It's too cheesy. It's too cheesy of an 80s movie for me.
Yeah. It's a shame that David Bowie's gone, though.
Oh, yeah.
God rest him, because you can tell he enjoyed every moment of it.
Yeah, this was because I believe, in his career where he had finally kicked his drug addiction. And he was like in the process of kicking his drug addiction. And so this was kind of his secondary glow up period where he was, kicked his drug habits and is now PC only, and it was just going PC only.
Yeah, but still, he was basically. If it wasn't for him, I think this movie would have been worse.
Yeah, if you would have put anybody else in that role.
But what about some other pop idols of that time, like say Michael Jackson or Prince?
If you would have put anybody else as the Goblin King, I would argue that Cyndi Lauper would be the only other person that would be appropriate. Because she had equally as obnoxious hair and was equally as flash in the pan singer of the 80s. And could definitely pull off the evil role pretty well.
Interesting choice.
I think if you were to do a Goblin Queen, it'd be Cyndi Lauper.
Yeah, well.
But I'm also biased. I love Cyndi Lauper.
Yeah. So, as you can see, Jim Henson had quite a few good movies under his sleeve.
Not only that, but a huge impact on everybody. Literally everybody.
With the puppeteering community, the entertainment community.
Even the public television community.
I mean, think about it. The Muppets are still on TV to this day.
To this day. Sesame Street is still on to this day.
It's been on for over 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And even with the old cast members gone, it's still thriving.
Very much so, and it's pushing, even now, it's pushing the boundaries of what to teach kids. Like, it's pushing social boundaries even now, which is something that not many TV shows can say they can do. Pushing social boundaries consistently at the bleeding edge for 50 years, that's, no other show can really say that. I mean, there's a couple, but they're not kids shows, that are publicly funded.
Yeah. So like I said, this is our season finale, so we won't be doing another episode for a couple of months. And when the time comes, Jacob will.
We don't need to talk about that. We don't need to talk about that.
Oh. Let's just skip that then.
Yes.
Let's start over. So this is our season finale, and we'll be gone for a few months, but until then, I'm Chris Wired.
I'm Jacob Niemuth. Just want to say thank you, everybody, for watching. There are more episodes to be had if this is the first one. First of all, where have you been? Second of all, check us out on WLOOCATV YouTube channel.
As well as my YouTube channel, Darth Star Killer 1912.
Yep, and we'll be putting together a playlist for you so you can binge watch all the episodes in one go.
Yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed this first season, and we hope to see you in season 2.
Yes, and if you have any ideas of what you want us to do, leave a comment in the YouTube videos.
Until then, thanks for watching Chris's Classic Cinema.
And thank you so much for watching.